Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment, guys. And you know my custom here is to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive. Their time, number one. What a precious commodity offered to every human being on the planet. Anyone that has landed here has been given the gift of 24 hours. How we utilize that 24 hours is going to speak volumes of you. I always invite you guys to learn to love her, respect her, honor her. And as you do, she will enrich all that you do. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created Wendy that comes before us. And so we want to honor her and thank her for coming and spending these precious commodity here with us at Threads of Enlightenment. Wendy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so thrilled and honored and excited. I'm excited to be here and just to see where our conversation takes us.
Excellent. There's a question that I usually pose to everyone that comes. And it's a loaded question, if you will. So I'm excited to offer that question to you. My question is, how do you serve mankind? Because I tell people our assignment is to be a servant. That is, in whatever format that shows up, that is based on your experience, your journey. But the prize we enjoy on this planet is to serve each other. And how do you serve mankind?
I try to live my life with unconditional love and acceptance of all. I grew up in a Pentecostal born-again Christian household, and everything was very conditioned. You know, you're going to hell if you don't believe this. And, you know, there are a lot of conditions to it. And as you grow older and you take that journey of life into being your own person and leaving your parents' home and those ingrained beliefs that were fed into you, you have to decide what kind of person, who am I and what do I believe? And throughout my, there were things that I didn't agree with, but the one thing that really resonated with me as I've grown as a person is just love unconditionally. Love everyone unconditionally. Lead from a place of love. Lead from a place of compassion and kindness, non-judgmental. You know, it's like the doctor's oath, do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
First thing, do no harm. And I try to lead my life that way. With kindness, you know, that saying, be kind, you know, it really is just lead from a place of love.
Well, the requirement as a Christian, because I grew up in a Christian, born again Christian home and Pentecostal, the requirement is to love your enemies, not to love the people that are close to you. So Jesus wasn't impressed. He said, I'm not impressed that you love your family and friends. That's everyone does that. He said, the commandment is to love your enemies. And that's the test, when you have to love someone that doesn't agree with you, that doesn't look like you, that doesn't walk and talk like you. And that is what we are called to do. And as far as, you know, there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about, in Mark 11, I think it talks about praying and confessing and move this mountain and all that type of stuff. And Jesus says, well, if you have unforgiveness in your heart against your brother, you better shut down your praying and all that stuff, because God is not listening to you. You better go back in, fix that before you come back here. And so people have been playing games with the Bible and call themselves all kinds of beautiful things. But
that's the way they want to see it for their own.
Yeah, that's it. One of our customs here, Wendy, is to go back. We want to go back into spaces. I tell people that we travel through life. One of the very space that we hang out for a short time is we hang out with a group of people that's called the family. And within this family, we have mom and dad, and we have some of us are lucky to have siblings and so forth. But mom and dad have been traumatized. As I said, everyone is traumatized, and based on their perspective, from their trauma and so forth. And they are now going to deposit data into you. We call that data information. And from that information, you and I are now going to develop beliefs, policies, and procedures, if you will, from the corporate world, which are the part of. And we are going to use that to now govern our life. What was
Yes.
your family unit like?
Well, that it's interesting because I use that a lot of, I call it the generational backpack. We're carrying
Mm-hmm.
around the generational backpack. And I refer to that and I pull from that or draw from that a lot in my work, in my writing. And a lot of that is, when of previous generations on your shoulders, on your back, you down. So what are you going to do with it? Are you going to slowly unpack it? Are you just going to put it down and let it go? And for me, I grew up, my mother suffered from mental illness. She was a manic depressive and an agoraphobic. And then also growing up in a Pentecostal household, there came that time where I had to learn to be very self sufficient because my mother couldn't care for me the way she would have wanted to. And that was hard as a child. I understand it as an adult. And again,
Yeah.
it's going to that, like unpacking those things, like
Yeah.
there's that understanding. I know they say with age comes wisdom, that's a cliche. But there is something about reflecting back as a teacher. We always talk about in teaching and education being a reflective practitioner, and reflect back on the lessons that you've taught and how you can improve them. I like applying that to my life, be a reflective practitioner, reflect back to the things that I've done, have happened, I've witnessed, and then reflect on it, and then how can I use it to improve myself? How can I use it to improve my life or better those around me? So I think growing up, I just had one brother, but we were very much that old school family. Boys do this, girls do
Yeah.
that. Very much these are boys' chores, these are girls' chores. He's outside in the yard with dad, I'm inside dusting with mom, like that.
Yeah.
They were very rigid lines, again, passed down from my parents, and, vice versa, as far as, keeps going back. And I think for me, a lot of it is being that reflective practitioner and seeing from family, my immediate family growing up, what do I want to take into my immediate family now? And what do I want to reflect back on and know that I don't want to repeat the pattern?
Yeah.
Does that
Critical thinking skill. Yeah, critical thinking skills is a must in reflection, if you use that word, because once we look back, as they say, it's 2020. Looking back, it's 2020 on hindsight. But when we look back, we have an opportunity to investigate, as you state, as a teacher does. What were the good points, what were the bad points, and stuff like that. But in doing that, what one has an opportunity to do is to reprogram their minds, to begin to engage in restructuring their thoughts as to why did I make that decision? Because everything stemmed from a decision, a thought that was taken, a thought that was received and accepted and acted upon. As you are growing within this family, and I know the intensity, if you will, of being in a Pentecostal family. I know the programming from the church side, especially roles and that each one has to play, as we say. And while you were there within that Pentecostal, and I mean, coming from your mama, also she's in tremendous need and pain. How did Wendy manage her day to day from there? I know your brother was also within that situation. How did you handle yourself, Wendy? What was your life like at that time with all of this hurricane type behavior and things happening in your home?
It's interesting because my brother and I will talk about how there's so much of our childhood that we don't remember, like whether we've blocked it out or, there's just a lot of them. My husband's got a memory, like he could tell you what he did when he was 3 years old, the hat he was wearing, the clothes. There's so much of my childhood I don't remember. I don't know if that's self-preservation, There's bits and pieces that do come up, but now I've recently, and it's interesting because I feel like after writing my debut novel and some of the childhood insecurities that comes up for the youngest sister in that, I'm starting to recall more, and I'm recalling it with forgiveness.
Yeah.
I'm recalling it with again, like from a place of love. My parents were young. They got married 18 and 20, first baby 19 and 21, and they were young. For me, it was all about survival. It was all about being self-sufficient, taking care of myself. I was fortunate that my grandmother lived with us till I was 12, so she was more of the mother figure to my brother and I at the time growing up. So I had a very close relationship with her. And a lot for me growing up was a lot of just stay out of the way, just stay out of the way. So it was very much taking care of myself. I don't want to speak for him, but I'd say my brother would probably agree with that. Our needs were met. We had a roof over our table. We had a roof over our food on the table. But anything beyond that I grew up in the 70s. Go out and play. We'll see you when the street lights are on. Everybody's parents in the neighborhood took care of everybody else's kids. Whoever's house you ended up with at lunchtime, that's where you ate lunch. And so it was a very different time in regards where we had all of this freedom to go and just be by ourselves. And I think I built a lot of resiliency in that time, but I was also a very, very quiet child.
Yeah, usually the first phase, once we have encountered trauma, the first phase of it is the survival mode. And that will go until I call it the day of visitation, basically, when all hell breaks loose in our life. And at that space right there is what I call enlightenment. Because to me, enlightenment means that you and I are about to embark on a journey to become a better student of the self. And right there is where we began to question all of the programming, all of the beliefs that were deposited into us that we have stored within our hearts, as they say. And that heart, I tell people, is the chamber, the warehouse within your soul, that you have stored all of that trauma, all of the belief, all of the pain and stuff like that. And that's where we have to go and uncover some of those things. And like you said, as far as not remembering, usually that's one of the tools that a survivor will use in order to survive. So here you are, you're in the mix of this. You had grandmother. Grandmother's always good. I love mine as well. She was one of my best friends on this planet.
Yeah.
And as you're moving through life and all of your the natural stuff is provided, roof, food, and all those things like that. Wendy, what was your relationship to others? Because I usually ask this question because we began to see certain patterns and within not just the relationship, how we cultivate that, but also patterns within the self as how we approach relationships. So what was your relationship like to others, let's say in high school and stuff like that with your friends? How did you relate to them?
A lot changed when my grandmother passed away when I was 15. So she was my foundation, my stability, my constant. And so prior to her passing, I would say that I was very much mold myself into what is expected of me with whomever I'm with. Basically, I'm just gonna keep quiet and just listen, be there, that kind of person, just be in the background, the fly on the wall, do what it was expected of me, be what it was expected of me. After she passed, my mentality I just stopped caring. I developed an eating disorder. We moved a lot in those years after, and I switched a lot of schools, and always being the newer kid, I was just like, I don't care anymore. I don't care. Like me or don't like me. I'm just moving through the world, just trying to get by. I did not like high school. I didn't understand cliques. I went to a Christian school for 5 or 6 years at my church. The whole world prior to my grandmother passing was I went to my Christian school Monday through Friday. I went to church on Wednesday night. I had youth group on Friday night, Sunday morning, Sunday school church, Sunday night church. And then after my grandmother passed, everything changed. I went to public school, and there's this whole secular world I knew nothing about. And I didn't understand cliques. I didn't understand popular versus not, just the cliques that I didn't, why are you telling me I can't be friends with this person? And then I started to develop a voice for myself, not always the most appropriate.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't understand the way the world worked. But then as I grew older, I would say that not understanding how the world worked turned me into a person that does lead with compassion, because I saw how unkind people could be for no reason.
Yeah.
Just because you fit that person's mold of what and so it was just very different. Moving into the secular world was very, very different for me. And I became a little rebellious with my parents because they had never really parented.
Yeah. Yeah.
My dad parented from a place of fear, of instilling fear.
Mhm.
And my mom she was too big. She had to take care of her.
Yeah.
So I would say life shifted quite a bit.
Did this shift, Wendy, cause you to go into the field of education? Because you said you became a teacher and stuff like that. Was this shift that you saw and not understanding cliques, not understanding and wanted to get a better understanding as to why people are the way they are and respond the way they are? What was it? Was that the reason, or was there another reason that you went into teaching?
It was not the reason. I was very lost in high school. No one in my family went to college. I was the first one to go to college, and if you want to go to college, you have to pay for it yourself. We can't afford it. So
Yeah.
I went to college, but I was so lost. I changed my major 3 times. I was so lost, and it was going to college was a big learning experience, not only educationally, but also personal growth for me. Like, who am I? Where do I belong in this world?
Yeah.
Discover, what do I believe and what do I want from my life? It is hard when you're 18 and you're sent out into the world, and it's like, okay, you're adult now. Well, you've only been on the earth for 18 years. You're not really. You got a lot of learning to do, and it's hard to figure out. I mean, I think it's still, again, part of that journey that we talk about is we're constantly evolving and discovering new things about ourselves. And I hope I keep evolving, because it's amazing the new things that we can discover, whether it's about ourselves, the world, the people around us. And so for college, I had always worked with children, babysitting, camp counselor. I nannied through college, but I wanted to try something different. So I started out to go into actually social work and theology. And I kind of had education in the background, but then I changed my major and I became a theater major.
Yeah.
Worked backstage on plays and things and done community theater. And then I ended up going to University of Rhode Island and graduating in journalism because I love to write. So then I went and worked at ESPN in graphics, because my internship that I had in college was at a local news station. They needed someone to do graphics. So I learned how to operate the graphics machine for the news. And it ended up brought me to ESPN. And I always joke, I went to ESPN and met my husband and left. So we've been together for 27 years, married for 20.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Thank you. And now I joke around that I did my degrees backwards, because I ended up, when I was 38, I went back to school to get my master's I had been working in education as a paraprofessional at that time. I did private preschool and was a head teacher because I had the degrees, the credits, the training I needed. But then when I went to public school, I needed the certification. So I went and got that as a master's in special education. Reflecting on what you said about equality and me wanting to, that feeling, I think a lot of that wanting everyone just to be treated kindly from high school on, I think that's ingrained in me. I just think that's who I am. Even when I was in the sports broadcast, I'd see how some of the people behind the scenes would treat each other, and it just did not. It's a boy. It might not be anymore, but it was a boys club beyond boys club when I was in. That was tough to adjust to. You had to grow some thick skin and learn to roll with and give back some punches.
Yeah, yeah. Those type places are always the workforce. The work field is always a brutal place, even as you're getting higher within the management aspect, because at the time, a lot of it was just mainly men. But I got an opportunity to mingle within the healthcare system, and most of the people in power, you had the guys that were in the C-suites, of course, but then you have the middle management folks. All of them were women, and some of the smartest women that you have ever seen in my life were within that field, and they can hang with the boys, if you will.
I learned to grow some skin.
Yeah, I've seen women hang with the boys, and so here you are. You had a full, robust, if you will, life, living, moving from different places and going into different fields, just by chance, as they say. Nothing is
Yeah.
ever by chance, but I think it was orchestrated because you needed to meet your husband at ESPN, and if you didn't do graphic, you would have never met your husband at ESPN. So everything, as people, life is, as this name of this podcast, threads. There are all these little threads that take place in our life, but it is weaving a tapestry that many of us, we do not have the insight or the knowledge at the time. But as we move through life, we can look back, like you said, you started in graphic. Who would have ever thought that your graphic beginnings would take you to ESPN, where you would meet your mate? But that thread in your life is there, weaving, creating, and you and I have an opportunity, if you will, to live out and from that creation. So here you are. You're a teacher. You said that you did that for how many years? 19 plus years. And you are getting a chance to deal with the young ones, the minds of the young children, and learning. What did you learn about you, Wendy, while you were there within that arena for 19 years?
I would say I learned that I have a gift and an intuition alternative learners. I absolutely love working in early childhood development, early childhood education, being able to be a part of helping a child. There's so much development that happens within those first 6 years of life, and everyone develops at a different pace. And I think having taken that path of going from from a head teacher in a private preschool to a paraprofessional in the public school to the teacher, I was able to develop skills to be able to step back, really observe each student as an individual so I could figure out what can I do to meet your needs. We're all different learners, auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and really get to know differing abilities and taking the time to get to know the student as an individual. And even my reg ed students, that meant that was very important to me. No matter how many years of teaching I had or how many students, whether I had 14 students or 22 students in a classroom, I wanted to know each child individually and what their needs, their learning needs, or their exceptionability, because they're all exceptional in their and how can I reach that student? And I would say to my parents, every year I'd say to my parents, especially my special ed students, that I am your child's advocate the 1 year they're with me. You are their advocate the rest of their lives. So what tools can I give this child to succeed? And what tools can I give these parents to continue to advocate for their children? Because a lot of parents didn't know. They don't know if their child's IEPs are being met and their service hours are happening. And I also have a daughter that it was in special education, and I may not have been every teacher's best friend, but I advocated for my child and I made sure her needs were met. And I think that was a big thing for me, was making those individual connections with all of my students.
That is a powerful, powerful stuff, Wendy, because a lot of teachers do not have the insight as to what you have just said and laid out. There are the patients or all the things that are necessary to be able to meet the needs of 14, 20 something plus children to that degree and specificity as far as this is for them. Because, you know, I try to tell people everything about every individual is different down to the heartbeat. It is
Absolutely.
absolutely different. 8 billion people have different heartbeats on this planet, as they have different eyes and hand, fingerprints and voice recognition, face, all of that stuff. The uniqueness of the individual, and you were able to understand some of those principles and yet tap into that to those children. I'm sure that they received it. So here you are, you've gained some insight within the industry or the field of teaching. And then there's this wonderful thing that shows up in our life. I think the world collectively called it, Wendy. I think we were calling it for years. I need a break.
Yeah.
Collectively, you know, billions of people, millions of people calling that. We need a break individually, and that crescendo manifested one day in the form of COVID, and we all got a break. And so here we are. COVID enters into the world, and you're home. You can't teach because special needs and all these different things, and what you're trying to teach. Yeah, a lot of people taught online, but as far as how you were teaching, your approach is interrupted, if you will. How did you manage that time? Because now everything has to be different. How did you handle that?
In regards to the teaching,
Yeah.
I still would have, I did teach online. I still had my morning meeting. I still did different things. My students as a whole, with my special education students, you know, I'm going to say just across the board for all my parents or all my students, a lot of it was supporting the parents during that time. It was hard. It was very hard. So yes, we tried to, as much as we could, to continue giving our students their services, giving our students the lessons, and continuing their education. But really, it was social emotional support. You know, for the kids, it was continuity of showing up every morning at 9 a.m. and singing our hello song and saying good morning to everyone. You know, we'd end our day with a dance party, and that day would end at, you know, like 11:45. So of course it's not a full day, but a lot of it was really supporting the parents because they just, it was hard. So just being there and having someone listen to them, I think, was my job during that time, was to support the.
And doing that, when I want to go back a little to your yoga teaching, when did you begin that? How old were you when you did that? Because that will become, and the principles that you learn within that arena will walk with you for a long, long time and affect your life. How old were you when you began that working within that field?
So I had always practiced yoga, but more like a gym setting, more like I'm going to take a yoga class to get some stretching done.
Yeah.
I've always been a spiritual person. And again, that, you know, I had the foundation, and that's what I took out of my foundation of growing up in a very religious household is that I discovered that I am a spiritual person. That said, to find out how I was going to channel that, I hadn't discovered. And then I also have I have scoliosis. I have really bad scoliosis. I have a lot of issues with my skeletal systems, we'll say. But I had gone to many rounds of physical therapy, and one of my physical therapists said, I want you to do yoga, and I don't want you to do anything else but yoga. That's it. Stop everything else. So anyways, it helped improve me. So then I went to yoga teacher training to understand what about this, the physiology behind yoga, because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, I'm a learner, I'm a constant learner, lifetime learner. What about the physiology of yoga helps my spine, da da. And then, so I did this year-long training to become a yoga teacher. Didn't think I'd actually teach, just wanted the knowledge. And I
Yeah.
came out with this connection, but yoga philosophy, that was what I was seeking. My husband is Jewish, and in Jewish religion, the foundation leave the world a better place than the one you came into. I love that. And a lot of yoga philosophy is about that, leading from. And so that was in about 1998 when I graduated right before in December of 98 and started teaching in January of 99. And it really, really did. I feel like I found what I had been looking for spiritually and how I wanted to lead my life moving forward,
Yeah.
if that
Uh,
makes sense.
it does. I always like people to say, I'm going to take yoga classes for some stretching. Yoga has
Yeah,
nothing to do with that. Yoga is it's a totally different practice. It is a mental practice, and the
it is.
body is used to express what is being mentally projected. And it's a much deeper approach, if you will, than how the Western world looks at yoga. The yogis of the old days would look at us and want to know what the heck are we doing
Yeah,
with their craft, because it has nothing to do with what they did and how they look at it and why they did what they did. But in understanding and opening oneself to that, you receive much insight and knowledge about the spiritual part of yourself. So now, when you are living in this life and you are diagnosed with the tough news that you talked about in around COVID, and you had to deal with the dismantlement of your identity, your 19-year identity. Talk to us about that, because I try to explain to people that in life we create identities. A teacher, one of us, some of us, a wife is an identity, a husband is an identity. And when we suffer a separation amongst that identity, such as a divorce or illness that shuts down, the dying or the death of an identity is tough.
it
Talk
is.
to us about yours.
So it was psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis runs in my family. And I was diagnosed with it like a decade earlier than my father had been. And my rheumatologist said that it was accelerated because I had COVID twice. And the second time was really, really rough. And so that's kind of, I had some symptoms. I had the psoriasis. I had some symptoms here and there, but it really accelerated. And when my doctors told me in January of 2023 that I could not go back into the classroom, one, I take medication that leaves me immune compromised. And two, I don't have the physical ability to
Yeah.
do what I need to do to care for my students. And so it was really difficult for me. And I had to give myself permission to be sad.
Hmm.
I had to mourn that I can't go back to the classroom. I can't physically do what I was able to do at one time. And then after, I was about a month of being sad, and I was still trying to take care of my kids from in my classroom from home. I still did my lesson plans because they didn't have a sub for me yet. And my paraprofessionals were running the classroom. So I'm doing whatever I can to substitute or to assist them. But then it was like, okay, I need to let that go.
Mm-hmm.
I can take care and focus on my health. And then it was, and I can be sad that this is happening now. And at the same time, I had my father who had it, and I see how he's learned to live with it, which was encouraging for me to be able to see. And also having conversations with him about this, we had this connection. He was like, you see me. Like he felt seen. You understand what's going on because chronic illness or chronic pain is such a silent disease. You can't see what's happening to my joints from the outside. So you can't see my inflammation or whatever. So it was interesting because it formed a different bond in our relationship because he felt understood. I used to make fun of him. I'd be like, Dad, do you really need to take all of those pills? All of those supplements? That's crazy, And then all of a sudden here I am and I've got all the pills, all the supplements. But I had to give myself permission to be sad. I had to give myself, and then I had to move to a place of acceptance that this is where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
My yoga practice looks different than it once did, and that's okay. My physical ability is different, and that's okay. It was a long road to get there. When I had to turn in my letter of resignation because I couldn't return to the classroom, that was so hard. My identity, I was a teacher. Am a teacher. What do? I'm a teacher. Who are you? I'm a teacher. That's my identity. And to have that stripped away because I physically can't do it anymore was very, very daunting. And then I had to make that decision, gave myself permission to be sad over it. And I cried many, many ugly tears. And that's okay. Release. And then I had to find purpose in my day. I could sit here in my house and be sad, or I could wake up and what's my purpose? What am I going to do today? And some days I could do more, depends on how my body's feeling. The writing is one thing that came out of it, which had always been a dream that I did not feel confident in my own self to make happen. It was actually my son that prompted that, but it was really like permission to mourn, permission to forgive myself, my body for being where it is, accepting it as it is, and then finding purpose.
I hope, Wendy, I always invite my audience to become hearers. You have to start out by listening. But when you transition and become a hearer, you begin to listen with your subconscious being. Your soul begins to engage, if you will. And when that individual engages and that individual hears, life begins to change. And all of you guys that are in tremendous pain, because I know quite a few people that are same situation as Wendy is. And I invite you guys to hear what she said. I'll go back in and play it all over again so that you can hear, because what she was talking about is beginning to give herself permission to go through a couple of things. And then she began to look for a purpose, because the purpose will wake you up when you're tired, when you don't want to move, when you don't care. The purpose is what will wake you up and move you. And you will find yourself grabbing what energy you have, because your purpose is so strong. It's calling to you that you must move. So those of you that are in a little pain, little darkness, allow your body, your mind to make the adjustment. Forgive yourself. Enjoy your grief, but don't stay there. It's a process. Grieving is a process. An identity has died. A relationship has died. But in death comes life. In order for a seed to grow, the principle says the seed has to die. And once the seed dies, it then begins to regerminate and it produces a giant tree that is able to feed many. And that is the journey. We have to come to a place by which we are going to die. That death is represented by us surrendering. We are surrendering what is happening. Once we surrender, we have surrendered our ability and we're tapping into someone else's ability. And so many of you are invited through your journey to be a seed, to die, but don't stay there. Find your purpose and become purposeful. So here you are. Your son comes in and reminds you of something that you are. Now you're suffering from an identity crisis, if you will, an imposter belief system because it's been with you for a while. I can't write out. I'm not a writer,
Yeah.
and so forth. So when your son came to you and said, Mom, why don't you do that? What did it do to you getting that instruction from your son? Because again, the threads, God had to use someone that means something to you that will prep and prick your mind and your heart to do something. And he whispered a thought to your son, and your son walked up to you and said, Hey, Mommy. And he expressed that thought. What did that do to you, and how did you begin to write?
I had always informed myself, especially poetry. Poetry was my diary. I wrote poems based on my own experience, things I observed and how they affected me. And when my son went to college, he goes to school in New York City. And when he went to college, he said, Mama, I want you to, every day I'm gone, I want you to write, and I don't want you to stop writing. That was in August. He came home from Christmas break, and I'm like, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me. And this is, I was only on intermittent FMLA at the time, so I wasn't fully out of work yet. Luckily, he didn't because I hadn't been doing very well. But then in that January, so he goes back to school. And in January, when I'm out completely, and I did have that, feeling sad for myself and, that kind of stuff. But it was that morning that there was that one morning waking up and saying, okay, I need to find purpose because I want to keep my promise to my child. I wanted to keep that promise. And with him coming home for Christmas break and I hadn't done anything, I was like, okay, I'm not going to have him ask me and me not say I haven't done anything. It's time. I have the time now. What am I going to do with this time? I'm home. I can't go to work. We were having another surge of COVID. I'm immune compromised. I'm limited as to where I can go outside of my house. What am I going to do with this time? But now time is a gift for me. So what am I going to do? So I went and got all of my old notebooks from college and early 20s. I got my thumb drive. I got all my little cutesy journals that I had like one or two poems in, various books. And I compiled them all together into a Google Doc. I printed and I cut and paste everything and I laid it out. And I realized that this is my poetic journey through life. Like this is almost like my autobiography. And I put it together and I created, that was my first book, was my poetry book. It was a poetic memoir, Kiss You, Love, Goodbye. And again, that's leading from the heart. Kiss You, Love, Goodbye could mean anything. It could be someone that was special to you at one time and you grew apart. Kiss You, Love, Goodbye. Like with distance, whatever, or something that's not serving you anymore, whatever it may be. It's okay to say goodbye to something with love. Like you were important to me in my life. This was meaningful to me at that moment in my life. And I always say anybody, regardless of whether it was good or bad, that came into my life made me the person I am today. And I like, so thank you. Like we all learn. So anyways, so I was able to make it into a book. I had a wonderful poet friend who edited it for me, and then I published it. But I didn't tell anyone except my immediate family knew. And then the only people I told were my brother, sister, and my parents. But then my brother posted on Facebook the link to Amazon and said, I'm so proud of my sister, published author. And he ripped that Band-Aid off. And it was like, oh, my guts were spilled out. And he feels terrible about it. And I just saw him last week and said, you don't know how much I appreciate it because you did something I wasn't brave enough to do. And I'm so glad because of that. It was like the creativity side of me that I used in my lesson planning for my students to create welcoming environments and exciting lessons. All of a sudden, it's being channeled into my writing, and all of this new world is opening up. And here I am, I'm 50 years old, and I'm like, what is happening? It's like,
Yeah.
and now I would never have thought. I'd always wanted to be a writer and an author, but I didn't believe in myself enough to do it.
Mhm.
And I'm very grateful that my son gave me that push. And because I just wanted to keep my promise to him, it came to fruition.
Yeah.
And then my
It was
brother
beautiful.
sold me out. No, I'm kidding. He made it, he pulled the Band-Aid off without realizing how much I needed someone to do that for me.
Yeah. One of the most powerful spaces that you have to go, Wendy, in order to heal totally is one must become vulnerable. And it's
Yeah.
one of the hardest things to do because when we are out there, if you will, we feel that we're unprotected and we don't know how we're going to handle it. The people know, we come up with all these things. But again, those things that we come up with are moving targets. They're thoughts that are not real, they're just thoughts. And so we have to learn how to manage all of those moving targets that come to us on, a million miles a minute. This person is not going to like me, this, all kinds of crazy stuff that doesn't really matter in the end. But when one becomes vulnerable, healing becomes, I think it solidifies it. It kind of like cements it into the ground because now you're open, you got no excuse, and you are going to be ushered into the space by which now you are going to begin to serve. I think
Yeah.
vulnerability is one of the
Yeah.
last places
Yeah. And
that
it
we have
becomes
to go.
more accessible. The healing becomes more accessible when you
Mm-hmm.
allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Yeah,
And I remember
absolutely.
years ago when I was in college and had to take like acting 101 as a gen ed, and the acting teacher said, being on stage, you just have to open yourself up and let your guts spill out on the stage, because
I love that.
that's what being vulnerable is. It's just like
Yeah,
opening up and exposing all the guts, the heart, all of it, just
yeah.
exposing it. It is extremely scary,
Mm-hmm.
freeing,
Yeah,
all at the same.
all at the same time. All at the same
Yeah,
time. And I tell a lot of people are afraid to get there, especially men. And I tell them, you are a man or you become a man when you become vulnerable.
yeah,
Until then, we are just living the stereotype announcement of what a man is. A man becomes vulnerable. And when he becomes vulnerable, he becomes a man. And
yeah,
I always invite people to get there. It's a powerful position to be at. So here you are, Wendy. You got out your gifts that was dormant, that has been there for many years. God had to had access to it, so He picked a couple of people that were close to you because you couldn't go outside. So He picked
yeah,
your son, and then He picked your loving brother to help you push you over the edge, if you will, that cliff that now you are exposed to all. And He brings you to this place by which He wanted you to be anyway, and that is to serve. When you realize that you were there and the expressions that you have put in your wisdom, your knowledge, your insights, all of these things that you have placed within those books. And my listeners know how I feel about books. Books house freedom if you are ready to be free.
yeah,
The data that is located within the walls of those, what we call the cover of the books, the wisdom that lies within there, the insights, the knowledge, and all of that, it's alive. Those are alive, and they are there, captured within those pages, waiting for someone to access them. And so I invite all of you guys to become those that are going to buy Wendy's books and offer them out as presents and gifts to people. Read it and learn so that you can obtain your freedom, because she's been through much and she has some stuff that she has learned that she has placed within those the walls that is called the covers that are there waiting to free you from your pain and your dark spaces. And so buy them and give them, offer them as presents, because we know it will free someone. So Wendy, here you are, you're an author. Talk to us as to when you began to get, because, people, since you had your uncertainty, your imposter syndrome, God has a way of bringing people in to have conversations with us to assure us that, no, you're not that what you think you are. You are what I made you to be. You are
Yeah.
an author. When those conversations began to happen, invite us to one of them. And when your words and so forth reached someone and assisted them, and how did it make you feel?
I thought I was going to retire as a teacher. So when coming out of COVID and with my diagnoses, which would have happened eventually, but it came earlier, I really thought I was going to retire as a teacher. And it was such an amazing learning lesson. One, it was letting go of the insecurity of putting myself out there,
Mm-hmm.
of being vulnerable with my writing, putting myself out there, but also showed me, and I should have known this because I've changed careers from going from graphics and to teaching, but it showed me that I am more than one thing. I prided myself as being a teacher. That was my identity. Even when I worked in sports broadcasting, that wasn't my identity. That was my job out of college to pay the
Yeah.
bills and husband. This was my identity. It was my gift. I had this beautiful intuition to work and help my students and their families. I felt that was it. And then to now be where I am and be a published author, I love that you use the word dormant, because that is exactly how I can move forward describing it. Because I always wrote my poetry, but now that I'm expanding other genres and having graduated, I always joke around that I'm using my degrees backwards. Like I had my master's in early childhood special education, did that for 19 years, and now journalism I'm writing. And I'm doing research and interviewing people for my books. And it's just interesting how life works out that way. But it really has proven to me that I am more than one thing, and there's always room to grow. One of the things, I signed all of my books. I signed all of them, embrace the journey. You never know where it will lead. And it's so true, because I never thought that I would be here. But when I allowed myself that mourning period, allowed myself the time to accept where I am,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to embrace the part of the journey. And there are days that I wake up because I suffer from chronic migraines and I do anything. And that's okay. I'm having grace with myself that this is not a day that I'm going to get much accomplished. And that's okay. If I just put a load of laundry in the washer, I did something and that makes me feel good. And then there are other days that I could write for 4 hours, and go out for a walk.
The thing is, Wendy, I think all of us have narrow view of our gifts. When you were teaching, your teaching ability was the gift. Now, the students was the arena that you were operating within your gifts. When that arena shifted, because you're still a teacher, God moved you to a different arena to continue your teaching in a different format. So He is caused your He has expanded, and that's what He does to all of us, because He did the same to me. He expanded our perception of what a teacher is all about. Because
Yeah.
for 19 years, we thought you just focus, that's it here.
Yeah.
But he's saying no. He said no. Being a teacher is who you are, but it's bigger than just your 19 years with the students. It's much bigger than that. And let me show you what that looks like. And then he begins to expand your profession in a different format, but you're still doing the same thing. It's just a different group of people. So
Mhm.
you're still a teacher, girl. So go teach and learn and expand. And all he does, it's who you are. It's the gift that he has given to you. He's just showing you that your gift is bigger than what you think. And so I tell people what happens to us at some point is the gift begins. We use the gift to get started. And then, Wendy, the gift begins to use us. And that's when life begins to become a little more interesting and the gifts are beginning to use you. And those of you guys that have been listening to us, I think we're almost an hour and change already. This conversation is so good that we're going to provide everything for you guys to get Wendy's books and all that stuff and for you to get into her space. And I invite you to go and learn, go and receive wisdom, insights, and knowledge. One hates to be stagnant in your belief, in your mindset. When you're stagnant in your mind, you cease to grow. If you've ever looked into nature and see where an area is stagnant, there's a lot of critters there. You have to spray all kinds of bugs because there's things in there that becomes dangerous. And so you don't want to be there. You want to be a picture of a flowing stream that is constantly moving, constantly expanding, that area where the stream is constantly expanding. New things are going through and flowing through there every day. And that's the lesson that we all have to learn. Let new things flow through you. All those trauma that you have stored in there, learn how to bring tools to uncover what they are, move through them, learn, because there's someone waiting for you to find the answers so that you can help them from their pain. Wendy, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
No, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a beautiful conversation. I've gained so much from listening to your words. And of course, as a teacher, I've written my notes down. Some beautiful things you said, I had to write down so I wouldn't forget.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for coming, Wendy. I deeply appreciate you sharing and spending those precious commodity, your time and your journey, because we have grown from it and we have learned much, and we thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.